Good evening, everyone. I'm Carrie Weber, and I'm the Frank and Clara Meditz Executive Director of the Fairfield University Art Museum, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you all here this evening. Before I introduce our distinguished speaker for tonight's kickoff lecture for our exhibition, Birds of the Northeast, Gulls to Great Auks, I want to do just a little bit of housekeeping and share some of the highlights of our spring programming. Unfortunately, COVID is going to keep our gallery doors closed to the public for the foreseeable future. This makes us incredibly sad. We really miss seeing you all in the galleries and at our programs, but please know there are many ways to interact with the museum in the absence of in-person experiences. You're here tonight, so clearly you know some of that, maybe all of it. We have two beautiful exhibitions this spring and an amazing array of programs for you to enjoy virtually. I'm happy to share with you, we had over 3,500 people tune in for our fall programming. I'm really hoping we can beat that this spring. So hope to see you at lots of the lectures. In addition to the bird exhibition, which you're going to hear lots more about shortly, next week in the museum's Walsh Gallery, we are opening an exhibition entitled By Design, Theater and Fashion in the Photography of Lala Asadi. Exhibition brochure hot off the presses. This show was curated by Dr. Cynthia Becker, an art historian from Boston University, and the exhibition explores the artistic process behind the creation of Asadi's carefully staged photographs, which deconstruct and reimagine stereotypes of Muslim womanhood. Dr. Becker will deliver the opening night lecture next Thursday at 6 p.m. right here, same spot. You know how to tune in now, so I hope we'll see you all there for that. You can find all of the programming for both of these exhibitions on our Eventbrite site and on the museum's website calendar. You can also find it on the extensive exhibition pages for each of these exhibitions. All of our public programs are free and are being presented on this platform that you have tuned into tonight, thequicklive.com, a production of our friends at the Quick Center for the Arts. Virtual tours for both exhibitions will be on their respective exhibition web pages about a week after the opening. So the Birds of the Northeast virtual tour, you should be able to see about a week from today. They come in and they film it and edit it, and then it'll get uploaded to our exhibition pages. And the recorded programs like this one can be found on our YouTube channel a few days after each talk and on the Quick Lives archive. The bird exhibition materials are completely bilingual in Spanish, and all of the programming will be recorded with captions in Spanish. I'd like to quickly thank Art Bridges Foundation for their generosity in lending a major Marston Hartley painting, which you can see behind me, to the exhibition, and for giving us a grant which allowed us to buy the camera which we are using to create these virtual tours. And they also provided funding for us to present the exhibition and the programs bilingually in Spanish. I'd also like to thank all of the other lenders without whose generosity the exhibition would not have been possible. We are joined by three community partners who you saw on the opening slide, I hope, who are supporting the programming for this exhibition. They're the Greenwich Audubon Center, the Connecticut Audubon Society, and the Pequot Library. And please check back on our web pages or Eventbrite in a couple weeks, because we're going to be adding 2 additional programs, which we're presenting in cooperation with the Greenwich Audubon Center, which we're really excited about. Starting on February 4th, when you visit the Pequot Library in Southport, you'll be able to see their spectacular copy of John James Audubon's Birds of America, the Bean Elephant Folio edition. And they'll be turning the pages periodically to showcase birds in our exhibition. So we're really delighted to be partnering with them around that. My thanks also go out to Dr. Todd Osier and Dr. Jim Biardi from our biology department, who together with our speaker, Dr. Brian Walker, co-curated this exhibition with me. Dr. Osier and Fairfield biology student Ann Panos were instrumental in helping us to create a field guide to the birds at Fairfield, which I think you'll hear more about later, along with a playlist of their calls. You can find digital copies of this guide and the exhibition brochure on our the exhibition webpage. And if you'd like physical copies of either of these publications, just let us know at the museum. Send us an email with your mailing address and we'll send them right out to you. So without further ado, I am delighted to introduce my colleague and co-curator of the bird exhibition, Dr. Brian Walker. Dr. Walker is a professor of biology at Fairfield University. He previously collaborated with the museum on our exhibition, James Prosek, on Natural History in 2011, writing an essay for the exhibition catalog. Dr. Walker received his PhD from the University of Washington in Seattle and wrote his dissertation on Magellanic penguins. Definitely not a bird of the Northeast, but definitely a bird. Over his now 15 years at Fairfield University, he's held many roles, including his current position as director of the Health Studies minor program in the College of Arts and Sciences. Previously, Brian served as interim director for the Environmental Studies program, director of the Integrated Health Studies program in the Marion Peckham Egan School of Nursing and Health Studies, associate dean in the College of Arts and Sciences, chair of the biology department, and co-director of the Latin American and Caribbean Studies program. His commitment to teaching and student mentoring was acknowledged with the Fairfield University Office of Academic Affairs Faculty Recognition Award for extraordinary excellence in teaching and pedagogy. Dr. Walker was the recipient of Fairfield University's prestigious Robert E. Wall Faculty Award, a Fulbright Fellowship for Teaching and Research in Brazil, and numerous other grants and awards. He is the author of dozens of scientific articles, mostly focusing on the effects of anthropogenic disturbances on those non-Northeastern Magellanic penguins. We are delighted that he has been a part of this exhibition from the beginning and are so pleased that he has agreed to speak this evening. During the course of this talk, please feel free to enter your questions in the chat box, and I'll be back at the end to ask Dr. Walker your questions. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Brian Walker.
Well, there's a way to start with some technical difficulties, everyone. I'm sorry about that. Thanks for tuning in tonight. My name is Brian Walker, and thank you, Carrie, for that great introduction. I'm going to go ahead and kind of get started with the talk today. As Carrie said, I'm really excited about this exhibit that's at the new museum for the next couple of months here at Fairfield University. And I just also want to spend a little bit of time thanking, again, some of the partners and participants who Carrie mentioned. Most particularly, I would like to, at this moment, thank Todd Ozier and Annie Panos, who were instrumental in creating the Birds of Fairfield, the really cool guide to birds that have been seen and could easily be seen on our campus. Dr. Ozier is a colleague of mine in the Department of Biology who teaches our ornithology class from where this database was created. And Annie Panos is a junior biology major who is going on to a career in veterinary medicine. So I just want to, again, thank them for their participation in this project. And this just shows you an example of one of the pages from that guide, showing you just a cool set of the birds that are possible to be seen here on our campus with links to more information about them. Carrie also mentioned a previous exhibit that I was involved in, the James Prosek exhibit back, 10 years ago now. I was really excited to be a part of that exhibit, and also really excited again to be back here at the university. One really cool thing that left a gift of that previous exhibit, Mr. Prosek gave us a life-size, full-size Tyvek picture of his sailfish, his swordfish, which is now hanging in the second floor of the Banau Science Center, and all of our students get an opportunity to see this when we walk by. So it's a great memory of that exhibit from 10 years ago. It's really special to be working at a university like Fairfield University, and especially at a university with a museum like the Fairfield University Museum, because this exhibit is actually a really good example of a unique partnership or a unique synergy between what normally would think of very different museum types. You see on the upper left a picture of the Louvre in Paris, and on the lower right a picture of the Natural History Museum in New York City. Now, when you think of the Louvre, you think of pictures like this, great artwork on the wall. Obviously, the Mona Lisa is the most famous player from the Louvre. And when you go to the Natural History Museum in New York, the American History Museum in New York City, you think of things like this. And what's really exciting about this exhibit is that we are able to bring ideas from both of these types of museum together. And this is one of the really cool things I think about the birds of the Northeast goes to Great Ox. Now, as Carrie mentioned, why is a penguin guy talking about birds from the Northeast? Well, I just want to tell you just a little bit. My penguins have been my life now for 25 years. And I've spent probably almost 6 years of my life living in Argentina, working with these guys who are pretty incredible little beasts. My work mostly focuses on anthropogenic or human-based disturbances, looking at tourism effects on penguins, and I'll give you the brief summary. The penguins do okay. But if you want to know a little bit more about my work, I'll be giving another talk later this semester as part of the biology department's lecture series in memory of Don Ross, which I've entitled What I've Learned from 25 Years of Playing with Penguins. So if you want to know more than you ever probably want to know about penguins, tune in a couple of months for that talk. What I wanted to kind of continue to justify myself, however, is, I'm not just a penguin guy, and I don't know if this is going to work, but one of my favorite songs was "Video Killed the Radio Star," and the Buggles. Yeah, they were a one-hit wonder, but I'm not just a penguin guy. And then when I was thinking about getting this talk together, I went back through my CV and realized, I actually have published some papers on birds from the Northeast, including a paper on northern cardinals that was co-authored by 2 undergraduates at Fairfield University. A couple of papers looking at snow buntings. Notice the black and white. Seems to be kind of maybe a theme of the birds that I work on. Another paper on snow buntings and Lapland longspurs. Again, all of these birds are possible to be seen here in the Northeast. A third paper, interesting paper, looking at brown-headed cowbirds and how these female cowbirds are brood parasites. They lay their eggs in the nests of 3 different types of birds, and the 3 birds that we looked at were these 3 that are shown here, and the stress effects of that brood parasitism. And currently, 2 co-authors and I are working on one more paper looking at gray catbirds and white-throated sparrows. And their stopover biology, looking at urban stopover sites in New York City. So I'm not just a penguin guy. So I feel pretty comfortable now talking, as comfortable as I can be in a nervous setting like this, talking about birds from the Northeast. Before I get into the actual museum exhibit, I do want to spend a little time talking about the Lost Bird Project, which is a second exhibit that's associated with the museum. Todd McGrain is an amazing sculptor who has a project called the Lost Bird Project, which could and has filled hours of video and books. Actually have this amazing coffee table book right here, which I would encourage you all to get and look at. Todd has created 5 amazing sculptures that are memoirs of 5 birds that are now extinct, and they have been installed in the places in North America where they were last seen. And in listening to his talk, with the Quick Center earlier this semester or this year. There's a sixth bird now, the Eskimo curlew, that's been installed in Galveston, Texas, which is particularly interesting to me because I lived in Galveston for a number of years. So it gives me an excuse to go back to Texas and see some of my friends and see that sixth statue. We are very fortunate to have the Lost Bird exhibit here on our campus. You can see the birds have been installed on the lawn in front of the library. The top picture is looking from the library up to Bellarmine Hall where the museum is, and the bottom is vice versa. Those are amazingly beautiful 6-foot high sculptures. And as I mentioned before, I would encourage you all to go to the Quick Center Live and listen to Todd McGrain's lecture that he gave late last year about the project. And one of the things that when I listened to it again, it kind of struck me was his talk about the texture and the way he has these birds and how they feel to the touch. So I hadn't done it before, but that comment gave me what I felt was the permission to go back to these birds. And the other day I went back and I just walked around them and walked close to them and touched them. And I just have to tell you, it was really a special experience, because this is, about as close as you're going to get. And so I encourage all of you campus partners, campus friends who have the ability, who are on campus, to go and walk among the birds in the Lost Bird Project. These guys are going to be here till September, I believe. So hopefully by that time, by late summer, the campus will be open, so other friends of the university will be able to see it as well. So I really am excited about this project and encourage you guys to go down there and kind of experience it. This is a screenshot from Todd's video the other day that I mentioned before. And I just want to kind of reiterate back again, the great auk is one of the 5 species that he talked about. And look, there's the Magellanic penguin that I work with. So if you look at them, they're actually not too far apart. These birds look somewhat similar. They're not very closely related. In fact, there are no penguins at all in the Northern Hemisphere. This is a picture on the left of a articulated skeleton from the great auk. And this is one of the first pictures that of many that I will show you tonight. That is from our exhibit, Birds of the Northeast. And you'll see this little yellow BOTN. Wherever you see that, that is indicating that the picture that you're seeing is part of our exhibit at Fairfield University. So the great auk skeleton on the left, the Magellanic skeleton on the right. And as you can see, there are definitely some similarities to them. And this is this auk skeleton is one of the examples that I talked about before of how we are using this, and this may be a made up word, this interdisciplinarity that we're showing to you as art. It would probably be pretty rare for you to find articulated skeletons such as this in a museum like the Louvre. But it's just exciting that, at Fairfield University, a university that is known for its interdisciplinarity and its curriculum, that this type of an exhibit is certainly not the exception and is more the norm. Another example of a piece that's in our exhibit is a picture of an auk egg by Todd McGrain. Again, the creator of the Lost Bird Project. When Carrie asked me to participate in this and we were talking about finding things to include in the exhibit, I told her, I said, I've got a lot of stuff from all my years of being around, being out in the field for over 25 to 30 years. So last night I decided, you know what? I'm going to do it. Here's a picture of a great auk, a common murre egg that I have in my collection. This was collected as part of a project that I was working on in graduate school. And while my photography probably isn't as good as Todd's at this point, maybe someday this can be something that I can fall back on. And here's a common murre. So these are still extant birds. They're still alive. And once again, you can see the similarity not only in the eggs that you see here, but also in the birds themselves. The murre is about half the size of the auk, but just kind of showing you a little bit of kind of the natural history similarities between these guys. Some of the other things that we've included in the exhibit are a series of museum research specimens. On the left, my left, you have American goldfinches. And on my right, you have northern cardinals and house finches. And these study skins were generously donated or lent to us by the Peabody Museum of Natural History just up the road at Yale University. And I just want to spend a minute or two talking about the importance of these research skins. You know, those pictures that I showed you before of the American Museum of Natural History in New York with the big articulated skeletons, that's just a fraction of the things that, that these natural history museums hold. And back behind the walls where the public treads are hundreds and thousands of specimens, such as you see here, that are really important in research on natural history and evolution, biogeography. And even there is some hope that potentially some DNA could potentially be extracted from some of these species that have been extinct to potentially use in possibly getting back or reestablishing some of these species. The jury's out on that. I'm not really sure that that's potentially a thing, but you read a lot of interesting literature about that possibility. One thing, a lot of people might be somewhat horrified to see all of these specimens in these drawers and thinking about all these birds that scientists have collected. But I just want to show you the data. This is data from 2009 about the number of birds that are killed annually in the US due to these various different circumstances, from energy, towers, oil poisoning, pesticide, building windows, and feral cats. Well over 200 million birds are killed every year in the United States by these different practices. 200 million birds, that is far, far, far exceeding the number of every single bird specimen in every single bird museum in the world. So this is just kind of putting into context the value of those skins and the relationship of how many birds are lost to these type of activities than those birds that have been collected now for over 300 years. And this just is a couple of examples of some literature, some recent scientific articles that have talked about things such as wind farm collisions, building strikes, window strikes, and this assessment of the number of birds that are killed by cats in Australia. I encourage you to look at some of this literature and really do some comparisons of how these other practices are really affecting our bird populations. This picture just shows you in relationship to the 5 birds of the Lost Bird Project, how many actual specimens exist in the world. There are only 55 Labrador ducks known to science in museums. Great auk, 78. Again, this is the picture from Todd's talk the other night. 78 great auk skins are all that are left in the world today. 720 Carolina parakeets, 1532 of the passenger pigeon, and I spent probably 45 minutes trying really hard to find the number of heath hens out there, and the best I could come up was not very many. But the point here is what I'm trying to make is that these are all we have left of these extinct species, and these obviously have been very important to the artists that a lot of the work that we're presenting to you in the exhibit today. Todd has a couple of pieces in the exhibit that are direct photographs. So you have 2 heath hen skins and the head of a great auk. Direct photographs from museum collections. Obviously, this painting is a direct likeness of one of the museum specimens of the Labrador duck. Anne Craven's depiction of the Carolina parakeet, while obviously not a museum specimen, certainly benefited from her being able to go and look at some of these skins. And finally, Morgan Bulkeley's very interesting depiction of the passenger pigeon certainly benefited from being able to see some of these skins in museums. Quickly, a bit of a diversion. I just wanted to talk a little bit about a book that I read a while back, again, talking about the importance of these museum skins. And that book is The Feather Thief. I would really encourage anyone who is interested in science and things like this to pick up this very, very approachable book, which is a story about a theft of bird skins from the Tring Museum, which is a division of the Natural History Museum in London. And this occurred in 2009. It's a picture of the Tring Museum outside of London. And this is the inside, so a classic natural history museum. Well, back in 2009, actually an American graduate student, an American student who was studying in music in London, and this is very well explained in the book, stole 299 birds from the Trigg Museum. Eventually 174 of those were recovered, 125 of them were never found. And I put a star by that 174 because of those 174, 72 of them were found without labels. And without labels, and you see pictures of these labels here, without labels basically means that in addition to the birds that were completely lost, these other birds were lost to science. Because without these labels, we know nothing about them. We don't know where they came from. We don't know what year they were found. So it was a really interesting study or a book. But what I want to point out to, as you see here, Fear's Stolen Natural History Museum birds will be used as what? This would be great if I could see you all live. I could ask you live, but the answer to this question is actually fishing lures. The American students stole these birds in order to keep them for fishing lures, to take them for fishing lures. And if you look into this literature or these stories, some of these pictures, some of these feathers are worth a lot of money. So it's just an interesting sidebar, an interesting kind of a diversion, talking about some of this interesting fact about some of these bird skins. But let's get back to the museum and some of the other pieces that are here for you guys to look at. As Carrie mentioned earlier, the piece that we've chosen for the cover of the book by Marsden Hartley is this beautiful piece called Give Us This Day. And I was going to take some time and read some of this to you, but what we have in the museum is not only the classic description of what what this picture means for an excerpt here. Unlike Hartley's other more traditionally composed landscapes from this period, Give Us This Day exhibits a methodical symmetry. The title references the Lord's Prayer, and while the depicted fishes function as memento mori, they also suggest both Christ's identity as fishermen and on the biblical stories of the loaves and fishes. Jump then from there, what we decided to do, in addition to the classical descriptions that go along with artwork in the museums, we decided to add a little bit of natural history to each one of these pieces. And so after reading this very interesting and thought-provoking description of the work, we've added in the bottom, herring gulls prefer drinking fresh water, but they'll drink seawater when they must. Special glands located over the eyes allow them to excrete the salt that would otherwise dehydrate most animals, and so on. So here we've coupled a little bit of natural history about the pieces that you'll be showing. And I again want to thank Annie Panos, our student who compiled all of these pieces, all of these fun facts that you'll see in the museum and in the digital virtual images. Another set of pieces that we have in the museum are a series of 12 pieces by Matthew Day Jackson called all entitled There Will Come Soft Rains. This is a really, I hadn't really known much about this until I walked into the museum the other day and saw these in front of us. And they're based on a poem by Sarah Teasdale. I'm going to take the time to read this poem to you because I think it's pretty interesting and it's pretty special. Notice that this poem was written in 1918. And published in 1918, which is the period of where World War I was just ending. And it's also very coincidentally when the Spanish flu pandemic was going on. And this poem by Sarah Teasdale is about what would happen if humans were gone and birds were left. Let me just read it to you. There will come soft rains and the smell of the ground and swallows calling with their shimmering sound. And frogs in the pools singing at night and wild plum trees in tremulous white. Robins will wear their feathery fire, whistling their whims on a low fence wire. And no one will know of the war. Not one will care at last when it is done. Not one would mind, neither bird nor tree, if mankind perished utterly. And spring herself, when she woke at dawn, would scarcely know that we are gone. That's pretty powerful. And we could spend probably a lecture or two just tearing apart and teasing apart this poem and the significance of some of the things that are going on around us today. I just want to show you a couple of examples, close-up examples of Matthew J. Jackson's. And he did a really incredible compilation of two types of previous art. What you see on the right left is his composition, and what you see on the right is one of the original J.J. Audubon pieces, the famous large pieces that Audubon created in the 1800s, 17 and 1800s. And you can see the similarity between the two pieces. The flamingo, that's also a part of the work, Audubon's flamingo, you can see the similarity between the birds. And the final one I want to show you, the ivy-billed woodpecker, again, showing you the similarity of the piece, the comparison to Audubon. But what I'm going to add to this one is also the piece that makes part of the background and takes up the background. This is Peter Bruegel the Elder's The Triumph of Death. And you can see from some of the major components how Jackson has brought those together with the Audubon prints. You look at this and you think about it and you couple it with the poem, and I have to tell you, this is some of the most powerful imagery that I've really seen in a long time. And I really encourage all of you, whether you go to the exhibit or you see it virtually online, to really spend some time looking at it. It includes a description, a more thorough description of the back artwork that associates with each piece and the Smithsonian or the Audubon piece. So this is really interesting, powerful stuff. Another component of the museum that I'm really excited to show you is these two pieces, and this is how they look actually set up in the museum. Now, these two pieces by Elizabeth Turk are called Bald Eagle and Common Parakeet. And you're probably wondering, how are those two things on my left similar to bald eagle and common parakeets? Well, what you have on the artwork are actually sonograms or depictions of recordings of what these birds would sound like. And I'm going to show you an example using, we're going to go back to the Magellanic penguin. So these Magellanic penguins, these are male penguins, and when they come home after a feeding trip to greet their mates, they make this sound called an ecstatic display call. I'm going to see if this works and if you can hear this. Pretty distinct sound. And I can tell you when you're living next to these guys in the field and that bird comes home at 2 o'clock in the morning and makes that sound to his wife in the nest, it certainly isn't all that welcome. But what I'm going to show you is this. This is a sonogram or a description or a depiction of that call. And I'm going to play that call for you again. And I want you to follow along on the lower panel as I play that call. So this shows you graphically what the Magellanic penguin's ecstatic display call sounds like. Let's now take this lower panel, and tip it on its end and compare it to the artwork that we see in the museum. And so you can totally see how the sound call of the particular bird has now been transformed in 3D printing to these really incredible pieces. And I encourage you, again, once the audio and the video virtual tour is up, to go online if you can't come to the museum and click and listen to the sound of the bald eagle and the Carolina parakeet and see if you can follow along in this pattern. A quick shout out to my dear friend and colleague, Alan Clark, whose recording and research I stole for this part of the presentation. Alan and I were in grad school together in Magellanic Penguin Colony. And so I just wanted to thank him for allowing me to use his pictures and his recordings and sonograms for this part of the talk. A few other pieces I just want to show you. There's three really beautiful pieces by James Reed in crows. You probably know that a group of crows is a murder of crows. So here we have a small murder of crows that are included in the museum. And just bringing a little science into these crows. I did a search. I actually saw this about a year and a half ago, a story or a report. This title is a little bit odd. Modification to the Aesop fable paradigm changed new Caledonian crow performances. Basically, if you know your Aesop's fable, one of them involved a thirsty crow who happened upon a jar of water that it couldn't reach. So the crow ingeniously went and collected stones and filled up the jar until the water was high enough. And so then he could drink it. And Aesop's fable talks about the ingenuity of this crow using these stones in order to make the water available for him. And since then, I'm not sure if you all can read this, but it says here on the bottom, in recent years, research into the intelligence of corvids, such as crows, has been very robust. And these scientists determined, I'm not quite sure how they determined it, but crows are as intelligent as a 7-year-old child. Now, I don't have children, but my friends who do have children and who talk to me about them know that, but anyway, you can decide whether or not your 7-year-old child is probably as smart as a crow. I can assure you the crow is probably a bit cheaper than your child. One other piece that I just wanted to show you was this installation by Paul Valinsky called Long Playing Birds. This is a really cool piece. And unfortunately, I didn't get a close-up, but what you see in these birds, these birds are actually made up of records. So probably no one under the age of 30 knows what I'm talking about, but these are LPs, long playing LPs, which Paul has then shaped and cut into these really amazing bird images. I wish I would have gotten a close-up so you could have seen the title of this particular one, but this is a really fantastic piece that as you enter the museum and turn to the right, it will be right there at your hand. So that's all I have really to tease you with for the exhibits. The rest of the pieces that are there, I think you're going to need to either join us if you're a member of the university community, or certainly virtually online. But I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking a little bit about some things and just relation to birds in general. I mean, I could talk for hours about birds. Dr. Osier has an entire class in ornithology that lasts an entire semester of birds. But just a couple of things I wanted to hit on, like these are kind of close to home to me. And that is this concept of birds as sentinels. Don't maybe use that word sentinel very often, but if you look it up in the dictionary, a sentinel is a soldier or a guard whose job it is to stand and keep watch. So much like we see in this sculpture from Greek mythology, the gladiator defending Athens. The sentinel species you probably actually already know about, you probably heard about, is the famous canary in a coal mine. All right. While this canary in the coal mine isn't necessarily defensive of us, it is actually an indicator that was used back in the days of coal mining in the 1800s and the 1700s. The coal miners would take these little yellow birds down into the coal mine with them, and they were used as detectors of carbon monoxide. They would succumb much more quickly to carbon monoxide than a human would. So if the bird keeled over in the cage, that was an indicator to those workmen that carbon monoxide had built up and it was time to leave. So those little and tiny little canaries were sentinel species, were indicator species for these coal miners. A kind of interesting personal anecdote about sentinel species or indicator species. My partner Matt and I have a bird feeder in our backyard. It's not a very good picture of the amazing array of birds that we get: cardinals, jays, buntings, many really interesting, colorful birds come to this bird feeder. Interestingly, about probably middle of May to late May of last year, of 2020, I looked out my window and I saw this. These are pigeons. In the 5 years that we've lived in this house together, I'd never seen pigeons at my bird feeder like this. And I was perplexed. I'm like, wow, what's going on? Why are these pigeons coming to my bird feeder? Like, never happened before. Thought about it for a while. Heard a couple of other things in the literature about similar type instances of odd sightings of animals. And again, this would be a time where I wish I could see you and ask you to raise your hand about why you think these pigeons were coming to my bird feeder in the backyard of Black Rock, not far from Fairfield University. The reason, I think, this is where we normally see pigeons, on the streets of New York City, in parks, restaurants, outside, searching for food. We don't see that right now. With the pandemic, this is gone. So now these birds don't have their food source, their normal food source. So they already have figured out a new food source as an indicator of the changes that have gone on in their environment. Really, I think a really cool example just in my backyard of using these birds as showing what's going on with us humans in the real world. I'll go through this quickly. These sentinel species, lots of work has been done and looking at sentinel species in the marine environment, not just seabirds, but marine mammals, sharks, other things like that are really important in elucidating potential changes in the environment that are coming, that could be coming, and also looking at changes that have already occurred. So these animals really are potentially very useful as indicators of climate change and human activities. A quick shout out to the Center for Ecosystem Sentinels. The link you see here, which is a group that I worked with in the University of Washington, where they're collecting really interesting data, long-term data, not only penguins, but other top species looking for patterns and indicators. I'll just go through this quickly. A really interesting book that I came across when I was doing research for this talk specifically focuses entirely on birds as sentinels of climate change. And I'll just read the top part. The ability of birds to show us the consequences of our actions is among the most important and least appreciated attributes. From ice-dependent penguins of Antarctica to songbirds that migrate across the Sahara, birds' responses provide early warning signs of the impact of climate change. So this is I encourage you, if this is a topic is of interest to you, to go ahead and no, I don't have a deal with Wormwood and Sacred Glue to promote their book, but it really is an interesting read, and just some of the research that has come using sentinel species. This one in particular, I'm going to briefly mention. Year-round tracking reveals multiple migratory tactics in the Cassin's auklet, which is you see here. I picked this one for one reason. Dr. Iverson that you see here was one of my advisors in my master's program at Dalhousie University. And the other reason was because this paper talks about the usefulness of tracking birds and the usefulness in using those tracks as indicators of different issues. And why this particularly struck me, last Sunday morning, I woke up and came downstairs, and my partner was reading the New York Times Magazine and said to me, "Do you know a gentleman by the name of Martin Wilkeski?" And I said, "Sure, I know Martin Wilkeski." And we're not talking about politics tonight, but in this copy of the New York Times Magazine last Sunday was a really amazing article about how far wildlife, called "How Far Does Wildlife Roam? Ask the Internet of Animals." My friend Martin Wilkeski has an amazing project using the space station, and they are globally able to track animals and follow their movement patterns. You see here him with a red stork, nice big bird carrying a tracking pattern, but they can even track animals as small as dragonflies and even some bees. They are now able to track and determine movement patterns, which are opening up a whole world of ideas and knowledge that we never really realized before. So those are some interesting and exciting things about birds, but you know, at the end of the day, we all know that the story is really pretty sad. And this abstract is from a paper from 2019 in Science Magazine talking about the specific declines of birds in North America. And the really beautiful but sad graphics that come from this piece show you over the last, 50 years, we've lost a change in birds of over 3 billion bird species. And the middle figure shows you here the different patterns of loss based on different habitat types, from grasslands to tundra. interesting wetlands are actually showing an increase. We could spend quite a while talking about that reason. But the article goes on to show you specifically what individual bird species or bird groups are declining, and other individuals that are increasing. So it's just a reminder that that the animals that we're sharing this planet with are certainly certainly being subjected to these declines. So where does that leave us? Where that leaves us? Well, remember, 10 years ago, I was really excited to be a part of the exhibit, James exhibit at the university, with exciting and really creative artwork. Our current exhibit, focusing both on extinct birds as well as alive birds, a very interesting combination of the two. But my question is, where are we going to be another 10 years from now, when the museum is celebrating its 20th anniversary in 2031? And if perhaps I'm still at the university and I am asked to curate that exhibit again, what will that exhibit be like? And that's kind of where I want to leave you to think about, is where and what that exhibit will be in the future. This is just one more example of Jackson's comparison of the snowy egret, but seeing time is run out. I just wanted to, again, put up this list of the additional activities that are going on with the exhibit. You've managed to get yourself through the opening night talk, and there are some really exciting other activities that are to come. And so with that, I want to thank you all for tuning in. I apologize if there were some technical difficulties, and Carrie, I will send it back to you.
Well, thank you, Brian, so much. That was great. I loved it. I love birds. That was a terrific talk. I'm sorry we don't have Brian's picture. I'm glad we got to have his voice through the whole talk, and it came through loud and clear. Technical difficulties are preventing his image from being with us. But I hope you all enjoyed that. We'd be happy to answer any questions. If you have them, just put them in the chat. I actually had one for you, Brian. You showed that great comparison between the great auk egg and the common Muir egg that you had in your own collection, which is very impressive. I think our scientific wall label talks about this a little bit, but I'm sure you could do it even better. Could you explain why both of those eggs have such remarkable coloring, or I guess it's not patterns?
Yeah, so I'm not an expert on egg colorations, but I believe it probably has to do with camouflage. A bright white chicken egg that would be, so both of these birds are ground nesters. And the Murres tend to nest on rocky cliffs. And if you had a bright white egg sitting on a dark cliff or on dark sand, it would be much easier to be taken out by predators. One interesting thing that I didn't talk about is the shape of those eggs. I don't know if you noticed them, but I wish I could, you could see my hands, but they're very oblong. They're much pointier on one end. And I do know this because one of my colleagues studied this. The reason that those eggs are very pointy is that if you take that egg and you put it on a flat surface and you roll it, that egg rolls in a circle. It doesn't roll in a very straight line. So that circle prevents that egg from rolling off the cliff. And that is a well-evolved characteristic of birds that nest on cliff sides and other precarious places, that those eggs aren't round at all. A round egg would just roll off the cliff into the ocean. So those cliff-dwelling species have that interesting pointy shape to keep them from rolling off the cliff.
That's fascinating. And this is a total tangent, but it reminds me that really my favorite book growing up was, I think it's called The Scrambled Egg Super of Peter D. Hooper, the Dr. Seuss book that has it's just full of eggs. It's eggs of all different shapes and sizes. But anyway, well, it looks like we don't have questions from our audience, unfortunately. But this was really terrific. Thank you so much for giving a preview of the exhibition, getting people excited about coming to see it, and reminding us all about how important birds are to us in so many ways. And this was a really fun collaboration, and I hope we can do it again before 2031, but for sure then, if not before. So
Awesome.
I'm glad we have your picture back for the finale. Thank you all for joining us, and we hope you will tune in for our upcoming programs. You can find them all on the exhibition webpage, and we hope to see you at the next one. Thanks so much. Good night.